In the spring of 1747, in the quiet village of Elmwood, stood a church that no one entered except on Sundays, though it was considered a holy place. An eerie smell lingered like damp earth mixed with something rotten. Locals whispered that beneath it, in an old cellar, the devil himself had been trapped. One night a teenage boy named Jonathan Harley entered the church and never returned. 4 villagers went into the basement to search for him. By morning, only to came back. They never spoke of what they saw. They only said, "Pray, something has awakened." No one yet knew what had happened on that land back in 1682. March 1747. The people of Elmwood village were busy with farming, prayer, and shaking off the last cold of winter. At the heart of the village stood an old wooden church. From the outside it looked peaceful, but inside, the air was always heavy, thick, damp, and strangely sour. The church had been built in 1682. Back then it was led by a peculiar preacher, Reverend Samuel Creature. History remembers him as a man of strange sermons. He preached not only of Christ, but of something he called the spirit of light and shadow, an entity he claimed dwelled beneath human understanding. Curious and braver than most, Jonathan told his friends he wanted to sneak into the church one night to see the ghost, he joked. But before he left, he built a dark chamber beneath the church cellar. He claimed it was a prison for the shadow. In 1687, the Reverend was declared insane and cast out of the church. 60 years later, the people of Elmwood had forgotten that tale. A 15-year-old boy named Jonathan Harley had not. Under a full moon in March, he did just that. By morning, Jonathan was gone. 4 villagers went searching for him: Mr. Woodman, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Glover, and a young farmer named Jacob, only to return to Mrs. Glover and Thompson, bloodied and pale. They said nothing, only this: "Greater than we could only make it back. Just us two. Pray do not go back in there." The village fell into fear, but curiosity lingered like smoke. That night a fisherman walking past the church claimed he saw a flickering light through the window. No one was supposed to be inside. Then, the strange happenings began. A farmer reported all his chickens had died overnight, the ground beneath them soaked in blood. An old woman whispered of nightly voices. "Free me," they hissed from the dark. Another said his son stood alone in the corner of a room, talking to someone no one could see. 3 nights later, the church doors creaked open on their own. The air no longer smelled of mold but of incense and rotting flesh. Some of the village elders began to speak again of Reverend Creature and his spirit of shadow. They whispered, "The shadow is a man, one who has lost his soul. Whatever he tried to trap may have been released." And those who had entered the cellar, they either saw the shadow or the shadow entered them. Jonathan Hale's body was never found, but for days after his disappearance beneath the altar, villagers discovered a scrap of blood-stained cloth, part of Jonathan's shirt. Next to it, hidden in old church records, lay a forgotten manuscript written by Reverend Creature himself. Scrawled in uneven ink were the words, "Greater than it is not the devil, and once awakened he seeks a new body. If he cannot find one, he takes the children." The church was sealed shut after that. But even now, on some nights, a figure can be seen standing in the windows. Some say it's Jonathan, some say it's the Reverend, and others whisper greater than it's no longer human at all. Midday Parole, 1747. In Elmwood village, fear had become a kind of routine. The church remained closed. People kept silent. Children were put to bed with their windows tightly shut at night. But the horrors did not stop. In the 3rd week, one of the 4 who had entered the church cellar, Jacob, suddenly went mad. He ran toward the church, screaming, "I am just an empty shell now. It took my body." There was a door. Behind the door, something lived. Not eyes, just a shadow, just hunger. They restrained him, but he said, "Greater than we went down there." The next morning, Jacob was found dead in his own home. His throat was scratched raw by his own nails, and carved into the wooden floor beside him were the chilling words, "Greater than the shadow lives." By then, the lives of those who went down the cellar had become unbearable. Mrs. Glover stopped speaking altogether. She would tremble at the sound of the church bell. One day she was found sitting in her yard, making dolls with her own hands, whispering, "Greater than these are my new children." The shadow couldn't take them. They believed when a person dies, their soul becomes a shadow for a short while, and if it is not properly sent away, it can take another's body. It only wanted me to open the door. She was sent away from the village. An old man of Elmwood, Peterborough, spoke quietly about the past. Greater than back in 1682, there was a religious sect here. But the most terrifying event happened one night in April. A young boy was found beneath the church stairs, covered in blood but alive. In his hand was an ancient iron key. He said, "Greater than it didn't speak to me. Now it's no longer trapped." That very night, strange sounds spread throughout Elmwood. Shadows flickered against the windows. Black smoke slipped beneath the doors. Dogs howled into the darkness. Among the old church documents, Reverend Creature's final note was discovered. "Greater than I trapped the shadow with my own soul. But if someone gives it a new body, it will return." The eyes of children are clearest to it. The villagers made a grim decision: they would burn the church down. On the first Sunday of May, flames engulfed the old wooden church. As the fire reached its peak, a long inhuman wail echoed from afar. By morning, the church was nothing but ashes, except for the cellar door, black metallic, unscathed by fire. In front of it lay a child's toy. If you love true stories of the unknown and real fear, subscribe now, because what's coming next is beyond imagination. The shadow isn't finished yet, and it's coming back. If you don't subscribe, it might be looking at you first. Summer of 1747, the shadow of the burned-down church still lingered over Elmwood village. In front of the black metal door hidden beneath the ruins lay the child's toy and the mysterious iron key that had once been found in a boy's hand one eerie night. Unraveling that mystery had become the village's greatest nightmare. Jacob's madness, Mrs. Glover's restless silence, and Jonathan's disappearance all were tangled in a strange web. The village elder, Peter Brooks, revealed that the iron door was the prison of the shadowed soul, a place where lost spirits, searching for new bodies, were trapped. In an ancient manuscript from the past it was written, "When someone uses a key to open the door, the shadow will be freed and will take control of the living children." And so, when the boy returned with that key, the village's peace was shattered. One by one, small children began to vanish. No one knew who took them, but at dusk, strange voices whispered from the direction of the church, soft murmurs and tiny footsteps. The villagers understood at last. The shadow was not just a ghost, but a kind of living entity that used children to create new bodies. Those who were taken never returned, nor did they ever truly become children again. Some fled to the forest, while others disappeared into the church's dark spiral staircases. Later it was seen that the homes which lost children were slowly stricken by paralysis, their bodies and minds weakening in strange ways. After these events, Elmwood became a place spoken of in fearful whispers, and no one dared to go there lightly. August 1747, time in Elmwood village seemed frozen in fear. Though golden rice fields swayed gently, the sky remained blue, and the distant hills stood serene. Something deeply unsettling had settled over the village. It was a hidden dread, one that awoke when the sun went down. At first, people dismissed it as the wind, but after what followed, no one doubted it anymore. Something had awakened. 4 months earlier, faint sounds had first been heard from beneath the church, from the mysterious black iron door buried under its ruins. The most chilling detail: their eyelids drooped, but their eyes remained wide open. The village priest, who had led prayers there for over 30 years, vanished without a trace. His last known location, near the black door. The very next day, children began to fall ill. Some developed fevers, others became lethargic, a few began speaking in unfamiliar tongues while asleep. Her mother, startled, called her back, but Sarah remembered nothing the next morning. One night, a 10-year-old girl named Sarah was found kneeling on the front porch, whispering toward the ruins in her sleep. In her hand was a cold, rusted iron key. It fit perfectly into the iron door beneath the church. He had long studied Elmwood's past and knew of Reverend Samuel Creature, the priest who once built a secret chamber beneath the church. Inside, he had imprisoned a dark force, a shadowed soul capable of taking possession of children. Hearing this, Peter Brooks, the village historian and elder, sprang into action. Peter explained, "This spirit doesn't just seek bodies. It feeds on memory. It burrows into the soul and reshapes itself into a human form." The younger villagers were skeptical, until one night changed everything. 3 children, Ellie, Ruth, and Sam, rose silently from their beds and walked toward the church. Dressed, barefoot, eyes wide but soulless, they stood before the iron door in a trance for 10 full minutes, then collapsed. Peter rushed to them and found something terrifying. Their bodies were cold, like hollow shells, devoid of the warmth of life. From that night on, the entire village changed. Wooden crosses were nailed to every door. Garlic was hung by windows. Ashes were spread beneath thresholds. After sunset, no one ventured outside. Peter Brooks knew they couldn't wait any longer. He formed a team: Thomas, a brave young man; Jonathan, the curious boy who had once held the key; Quincy, a scholar of forgotten rites; and Eliza, an elderly woman who had once served in the church. With Sarah's rusted key in hand, they descended into the ruins on a moonless night. The air beneath the church was foul with rotting wood, dust, and a bitter scent of old iron. By lantern light, they reached the door, rusted, carved with symbols not meant for human eyes. The walls were scratched as if by desperate fingernails, and others that belonged to no known child in Elmwood's history. Mist hung in the air, etched above the door in Latin. Lux ex tenebris, sed tenebrae manent. Jonathan slowly inserted the key. "I never meant harm, I just want to return." Click. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow corridor. Small handmade dolls lined the walls, each one shaped like a child, with names stitched into them: Sarah, Ellie, Ruth. He realized the spirit had awakened, and it now sought to live again. At the end of the corridor was a circular chamber with a ritual circle drawn into the dirt. In its center sat a single doll, eyes wide open, and blinking. The knit turned its head. Everyone recoiled. From its mouth came a slow whisper: "But they all know beneath the ruins lies more than just earth and stone. I only want a body." Peter collapsed to his knees. Thomas, voice trembling, said, "If we don't stop this now, no one in the village will survive." Eliza opened an ancient book left by Reverend Creature and began reciting a banishment spell. The chamber quaked. Symbols on the walls shifted as if something was moving inside them. The dolls shrieked. The mist swirled like a storm. Together, the team slammed the iron door shut and sealed it. They emerged into the night. Only Thomas whispered, "We closed the door, but did the shadow really stay behind?" Since that night, no one in Elmwood speaks of what happened. There sleeps the body of the past and the shadow of what's yet to come. Winter, 1747. The icy wind swept through every narrow path of Elmwood village. But what truly chilled the villagers was not the cold, it was the rising dread. The curse of the shadow had begun to spread, and its terrifying source had become the village's most whispered mystery. Peter Brooks, the village elder and historian, had long studied the origins of the curse. One winter morning, deep within an ancient library, he uncovered a lost manuscript and account of the life and forbidden practices of Reverend Samuel Creature. But in secret, he believed that to protect the innocent, darkness must sometimes be controlled. Reverend Creature had once been a powerful clergyman known for walking the thin line between sacred faith and occult sorcery. To the public, he was holy, and so he made contact with something beyond human understanding. According to the manuscript, around 1740, Reverend Creature forged a powerful curse, the Shadowed Soul. This entity could possess human bodies, especially those of children, whose spirits were considered the purest and most vulnerable. Through ancient rites and geometric rituals, the Reverend used a spell to trap the soul inside a sealed chamber beneath the Elmwood Church, binding it behind a black iron door with sacred carvings. It remained hidden for years. But by winter of 1747, as children began vanishing and the village grew colder and darker, the truth became clear. The door had been opened. The cursed soul was free. The first to confront it was Jonathan Harley, a brave young boy who once stood before the church's door. Only knowledge could fight this evil. From that moment, a terrible darkness spread across Elm. That night, he felt the shadow try to enter. Him felt it crawl into his soul. Peter Brooks and his group realized that brute strength would not be enough. From the Reverend's manuscript, they uncovered part of the original incantation, one that could bind the soul once more. But the ritual required a metallic relic, forged by Creature himself, a unique device hidden within the church's lower chamber. Without it, the curse could never be broken. Though terrified, the villagers prepared to retrieve it. One winter night, a small team entered the ruined church. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence grew, broken only by distant whispers and the sound of crying children that weren't really there. Thomas, a young man full of courage, reached the relic first, but as his hand touched it, the shadow struck. The group felt themselves being pulled not by hands, but by sheer force of will, as if they were toys in a child's nightmare. Thomas cried out, "Greater than we have to stay together. If we split up, it'll consume us one by one." Though fear gripped their hearts, the group stood firm. They retrieved the relic and began the incantation. Slowly it shrank back, retreating like smoke into the dark. The whispers turned to shrieks. The shadows swirled. The ground trembled. But through their unity in the ancient prayer, the shadow began to weaken. The curse was broken but not destroyed. The relic survived, though scarred and blackened. Peter knew the truth. Greater than the shadow is not gone. It's waiting. Still, the people of Elmwood had changed. They were no longer helpless. They had discovered a strange courage, one born from suffering, unity, and truth. And with that, a new chapter began. A long war, not of fire and swords, but of memory, ritual, and resistance. The shadow still lingered, but now Elmwood was ready to fight back. On a frigid night in the winter of 1748, a strange mixture of fear and hope spread through the hearts of Elmwood's villagers. Though the shadow's curse had poisoned their lives with darkness, Peter Brooks and his group knew the time to fight had come. They stood firm before the black iron door beneath the ruined church, gathering courage for what could be their final battle. He looked around at the others and said, "If anyone here is afraid, I will carry your fear too." The shadow had grown stronger, so powerful that no ordinary person could hope to face it. But the brave youth of Elmwood knew that to imprison the entity once again, they would have to confront the ancient force that had once been locked behind that door. Words meant to seal the shadow once and for all. Thomas, the courageous young man who had grown up under Peter Brooks' guidance, was the strongest among them, bold, focused, and determined. "I will go with you." His bravery sparked a fire in the hearts of the villagers. Together, they began reciting the ancient incantation words passed down from Reverend Samuel Creature's forbidden manuscripts. Throughout the night, they stood before the door, chanting in unison. The air turned thick and still. From the other side of the iron door came whispers and unnatural noises. "Greater than set me free. The shadow will return." Some held their breath. Others trembled. But Thomas stood tall, gripping Peter Brooks' hand tightly, his resolve unshaken. The longer they chanted, the more the shadow weakened. Suddenly a burst of light shone from behind the door, a blinding flash that filled the chamber with warmth and a sense of release. Their hope surged. The entity tried to consume him from within, to tear away his humanity and take full control. But Thomas fought back not with fists, but with his will, his memory, his love for his people, had they finally defeated it. But the night's trial was not yet over. In a final, desperate move, the shadow forced its way into Thomas's body. Within him began a silent war, a battle between soul and shadow. Peter Brooks knew this was no ordinary struggle. This was spiritual warfare. Whether Thomas could conquer the darkness would determine the fate of them all. The group waited, breathless, by the sealed door. Through his bravery, they had weakened the shadow, sealed it once more, and gained a deeper understanding of what they faced. Then Thomas staggered out. He collapsed before them unconscious. His eyes were open, but empty. No light, no presence. The villagers were silent. Their warrior had returned. But something was missing. His soul had not. Yet in that moment of heartbreak, something stronger than fear took hold of them. Resolve. Thomas's sacrifice had not been in vain. They realized that the strength in ancient words alone weren't enough. The battle against the shadow required unbreakable spirit and unity. This night marked the beginning of a new chapter in Elmwood's long war. A chapter where humans no longer fought only the shadow but their own fear, doubt, and despair. Some would fall, but none would surrender. The fight would continue until the curse of the shadow was erased from the earth forever. The winter of 1748 in Elmwood was harsh and unrelenting, but colder than the air was the unsettling silence that crept through every corner of the village. Thomas's sacrifice had begun a new chapter in the battle against the shadow. Yet the weight of his loss lingered like frost on the villagers' hearts. Thomas was not just a young man, he had been Elmwood's strength, its symbol of hope. His body had returned from behind the black iron door, but the light in his eyes, the essence of his soul, was gone. The villagers began to understand. This was not just a battle of flesh and blood. It was a war of spirit, of mind, and of soul. Inside Thomas, an invisible war was raging between his will to live and the dark force trying to consume him. There was a voice inside him now, a cold whisper of fear, sorrow, and death. But deeper still, another voice answered, "Greater than I will not fall. My soul will survive." Peter Brooks and the others knew this internal war was the key to defeating the shadow. They remained outside the church, chanting ancient prayers, not just to seal the evil, but to give Thomas strength from the outside, to call him back. Inside his mind, the battle intensified. On one side, the darkness, the shadow, offering release from pain. On the other, the warmth of life, his memories, his people, his purpose. Thomas drifted through a mental void, feeling his identity slipping away. Memories blurred, time fractured, but his heart screamed through the silence, "Greater than you will not take me." And then, in that final moment, when despair threatened to claim him, Thomas made a choice. He accepted his fear. He didn't run from it. He embraced the truth that fear was a part of him, but it did not control him. And from that acceptance came strength. Bit by bit, the light returned. His soul, battered but not broken, lit up the darkness. Outside, Peter and the others watched as Thomas stirred. His breathing returned. His fingers moved. His eyes opened. Behind those eyes lay the memory of what he had faced, and a truth he could never unsee. Dimmed, haunted. The light was back, but it was different. Thomas had survived. They knew they hadn't won the war, but they had witnessed something rare, a soul returning from the brink. But he would never be the same. The enemy was not just the shadow, it was fear itself. The villagers welcomed him back with silent reverence. Elmwood now faced a new reality. To fight the curse, they would need more than ancient spells. They would need each other. They would need unity, courage, and the will to endure. Thomas became a symbol not of tragedy, but of what it meant to face the darkness and still stand. His story echoed through the village as a reminder. Even in the deepest shadow, the light within can burn bright enough to find the way back. And so, Elmwood prepared not for peace, but for the next battle. The curse still lingered. The shadow still watched. But now, Elmwood no longer stood alone in the dark. On a cold January night in 1749, a silence fell over Elmwood so deep, it resembled that of a city of the dead. For months now, no one in the village spoke above a whisper. The sound of children's laughter had vanished, and behind every door, fear lingered like a living thing. It felt as if the shadows themselves had begun nesting in the cracks of the walls. Thomas's return, his battle with the shadow, and the eerie presence in the doll's eyes all seemed to point to something even larger, even darker. The shadow had not stopped. It had evolved. It was no longer just a spirit, it had become a silent infection, slipping into people's minds, corrupting reality itself. Peter Brooks realized the truth. This evil could no longer be contained. It had to be destroyed, because the shadow was no longer local, it was spreading like a virus across soul, time, and thought. He returned to the ancient manuscript of Samuel Cratcher's final writings. There, hidden beneath layers of cryptic ink, was a fragment of an unfinished banishment ritual, pure, whole. In exchange, the shadow will burn. If completed, it could incinerate the shadow once and for all. But there was a price. A full soul must be offered. Thomas stepped forward. It already touched me, he said. I'm not fully human anymore. I'll go, Peter shouted in protest. You fought your way back. If you go again, you won't return. But in Thomas's eyes burned the same fire Peter had seen the first night they stood before the iron door. They began preparations. They needed the complete incantation, a forged sigil of metal, and the courage to enter the accursed chamber one last time. Peter, Eliza, Jonathan, and Thomas four souls walking willingly into darkness. That night, they descended below the church. This time, the door was no longer sealed. It hung open just slightly, as if the shadow itself was inviting them in. Inside, the former dull room had transformed into a vast, circular hall. Faces were carved into the walls, eyes watching. Shadows moved on their own. The air reeked of rust, blood, and ash. Elisa began to chant. Tom, who stepped into the center of the sigil, etched in iron and blood-drenched ash. Peter held a staff carved with ancient marks. Suddenly, the chamber trembled. Shadows tore from the walls and surged toward Thomas like smoke drawn to flame. Thomas closed his eyes. I'm ready, he said. Say it with your heart. Tell it. We want freedom. Eliza's voice rose, trembling but firm, reciting the ancient spell. The air roared like a storm, filled with screams and cries from souls long lost. One voice echoed above the rest, a shriek of rage, pain, and fury. Greater than you cannot leave us. I was always here. Thomas's body began to glow bright, blinding light. Peter shouted, You're doing it. And Thomas whispered, Let the light return. Break the shadow. Then everything stopped. Silence. A heartbeat later, there was a flash, a quake, and a child's soft laughter. We are truly free now. The shadows vanished. The hall began to turn white, the walls dissolving into dust. Thomas no longer stood. In his place lay a folded shirt and a small wooden doll, its eyes gently closed. Jonathan fell to his knees and wept. Peter turned to Eliza and whispered, Greater than he took the shadow with him. They climbed out into the morning. Sunlight warmed the stones. Birds sang. A baby cried. It was the first peaceful dawn Elmwood had known in years. The black iron door was sealed one final time. This time, encased in stone mixed with blood, iron, and sacred ash. The church was abandoned. No one ever entered again. And yet, sometimes, in the glimmer of a child's eyes there is a flicker of firelight. And some villagers say that in their dreams, they still see the boy with burning marks on his skin, smiling faintly as he says, Greater than, don't be afraid. I'm still here, watching over you. Spring had returned to Elmwood, and with it, signs of new life. The church was sealed, the black door buried in stone, and Thomas's sacrifice still echoed in the hearts of the villagers. Fields once again echoed with the laughter of children. Shops reopened. A new priest arrived. Peter Brooks returned to writing the history of the village, believing like many that the curse had finally ended. But no one knew the truth. Shadows never die. They change. No one realized it was once the home of Reverend Kratz's apprentice. In April of that year, a new family settled just beyond the village edge: woodcutter Lucas Morgan, his wife Abigail, and their 3-year-old son Simon. They moved into a neglected house south of the church ruins. At first, life was peaceful, but soon, strange things began to happen. Simon's toy horse would spin on its own. Thin marks appeared on the walls like tiny fingers had scratched them. At night, Simon whispered in his sleep, Greater than the shadow watches me. Abigail grew terrified. Lucas dismissed it. One morning they found Simon with dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days. On his back was a faint, inked circle surrounded by Latin characters. 3 days later, Simon vanished. The search lasted the entire day, but there was no sign of him. When Peter Brooks heard the news, he froze. He muttered only one thing. Greater than the shadow is reborn. It can only be put to sleep. Returning to the ancient manuscript, Peter flipped through the final, overlooked pages. There, he found a chilling warning. Greater than the shadow cannot be destroyed. But when a child begins to call it friend, that is when it awakens. Spring had returned to Elmwood, and with it, signs of new life. The church was sealed, the black door buried in stone, and Thomas's sacrifice still echoed in the hearts of the villagers. Fields once again echoed with the laughter of children. Shops reopened. A new priest arrived. Peter Brooks returned to writing the history of the village, believing like many that the curse had finally ended. But no one knew the truth. Shadows never die. They change. In April of that year, a new family settled just beyond the village edge: woodcutter Lucas Morgan, his wife Abigail, and their 3-year-old son Simon. They moved into a neglected house south of the church ruins. No one realized it was once the home of Reverend Kratz's apprentice. At first, life was peaceful, but soon, strange things began to happen. Simon's toy horse would spin on its own. Thin marks appeared on the walls like tiny fingers had scratched them. At night, Simon whispered in his sleep, Greater than the shadow watches me. Abigail grew terrified. Lucas dismissed it. One morning they found Simon with dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days. On his back was a faint, inked circle surrounded by Latin characters. 3 days later, Simon vanished. The search lasted the entire day, but there was no sign of him. When Peter Brooks heard the news, he froze. He muttered only one thing: greater than the shadow is reborn. Returning to the ancient manuscript, Peter flipped through the final, overlooked pages. There, he found a chilling warning: greater than the shadow cannot be destroyed. It can only be put to sleep, but when a child begins to call it friend, that is when it awakens. Peter didn't go alone this time. He was joined by Jonathan and Eliza's granddaughter Mary and the new priest Father Henrik. Together, they set out for the Morgans' home. From the moment they entered the old house, they felt it. Something was there. Ink smudges on the walls, white stains on the ceiling, tiny footprints scattered across the floor like children had run through the dust. In a chest they found Simon's drawings, a figure with hollow eyes and a puppet-like face. Below it, the words, "Greater than my friend lives under the floor." Beneath a loose board, they discovered a trap. They opened it. Cold air poured out like a breath held too long. In the darkness below stood Simon, but it wasn't Simon. His face twisted in an unnatural grin. His eyes were empty, his small frame contorted. He looked at them and whispered, "Greater than we were just playing. Why is everyone afraid?" The shadow's new trick. Peter realized the truth. The shadow no longer attacked. It merged, it befriended, it sought love. It entered the world not through fear, but through trust, through the imagination of children. Father Henrik began reciting the banishment. Mary read aloud the final prayer from the manuscript, but this time the shadow didn't flee. It spoke, "Greater than you always chase me away. I was alone. I only wanted to stay. I only wanted to play." Elisa cried out, "Greater than you're lying. You want their ball. You want to be human, not just exist." The lights in the house flickered out. Then the shadow said something that silenced the room. "Greater than I was human. Once I was burned, I was a mistake. I am the priest's child." Silence. Peter whispered, "Greater than its creature. This shadow is a shattered piece of his soul. He made it. He split himself to create it." The final act before the prayer could finish. Simon collapsed, screaming. The shadow tried to escape, but it was trapped inside the circle carved into the floor. Peter set fire to the center. The shadow let out a wailing shriek. "Greater than let me be human." One more time. Flames consumed the room. The puppet, the marks, the voice. Gone. Simon survived, but the darkness of that night never left his eyes. Elmwood had learned a harsh truth. Greater than shadows don't die. They evolve. They wait. And in the curious, innocent minds of children, they find their safest refuge. Later, Peter wrote in his journal, "Greater than the shadow isn't purely evil. It is something forgotten, born from our fears, our greed, our curses. And one day, it will return."